Hello, everyone. Good evening, all. Thank you for joining me, and apologies for my tardiness today. Late start. I've been running around, and I'm actually foregoing a lovely meal right now to be able to join you guys on time. Well, slightly late, but on time. So, there you go. I was actually very tempted to postpone this for another day. Then I thought, what, I've moved this enough. It was last week, and then it was yesterday, and now it's today. And I thought, what, I can't do it again. Otherwise, they'll lose faith in my ability to do what I said I was going to do. So yeah, there you go. Blue Man Vision says, appreciate it. Thank you very much. Antebellum said, be as late as I want to be. Oh, I can't do that. Can't be living up to stereotypes here. Everyone's expecting me to be late. Maybe not me personally, but let's try and be on time. Let's try and defy the stereotypes. Hello, everyone. Wildflower, how you doing? Khalid, Mark, Kapruki is in the house. What's going on? Antebellum, Blue Man, Javon, Talia, Patrina, Zehoven. Got a good crowd today. Good crowd, strong crowd today. Wesker, someone, Healing Waters, Macy. Wow, this is gonna be an epic stream. I don't know what I've done to deserve this audience today. Must be the subject, must be the topic. Croy Fadas. I don't know how to say your name, or no, I've probably just murdered it there. Croy Fadas. I'm sorry. That's I can't say that name unless you tell me how. See if you can phonetically type it out for me, and I'll stop butchering your name. I have got this thing about saying names correctly. In the UK, a lot of I come from a teaching background, and in the UK, teachers wear like a badge of honor to pronounce ethnic. I'm going to use the word ethnic kids' names incorrectly. It's like a really kind of like English thing to pronounce names incorrectly and to not care about it. I'm not saying all that. That's like a really English thing. I'm just gonna say your name incorrectly and not care about it. Like, you've been in my form class for 5 years, but I'm never gonna learn to say your name correctly. And I, obviously, being of Nigerian descent and with a name that people used to always pronounce incorrectly, made sure I said people's names correctly. So I would always be like, how do I pronounce that? Teach me how to say it, and then make every effort to say it correctly from that point forward. And I used to really take it like offensively on the students' behalf if I said their names incorrectly. So yeah, don't know why I told you that story. McFat, you cancelled an engagement to be here. Oh wow. You know what? Yeah, I hope I don't disappoint. Oh man, you guys are heaping the pressure on. All right, so I guess cross fadas. Okay, cool. It's French. Croy fadas. Oh, so cross fanatic. Croy fadas. Okay, doesn't mean anything. It's from Xbox days. Okay, cool. All right. So in that case, I guess I won't be offending anyone if I do pronounce it incorrectly, because my French is terrible. So yeah, there you go. Wasn't a live stream starting at 8:30? I think it was starting at 8:30 a few days ago when it was booked last week, and then when I moved it, I think to Monday, yeah, it was still starting at 8:30. But then when I moved it yesterday to today, I moved it to 9:30 because I can't make 8:30s on a Tuesday. Welcome to the TKM family, Fancy Nancy. Thank you for that lovely warm welcome you gave her, Patrina. Yeah, it's going to be a good. Well, I'm not going to oversell it. It's not going to be too long. I had two approaches to this live stream, and I decided to take the relatively lightweight approach. We could go really, really heavy with this live stream, but I'm going to tell you what my agenda and my intention is today. And yes, I'm going to be quite open about the fact that I do have an agenda today. Okay. I could sit here and pretend and paint the fact that I'm going to just be completely just like, objective, but I'm not. This is an agendaed live stream, and the agenda is to provide, or at least to counterbalance, what I see as a biased narrative against the melanation of Europe, i.e., Black people being essentially present with a particular focus on Britain. We're going to focus on, but being present in Britain, but not only Britain, the wider European continent. And the Black presence often being obfuscated or anthropologically absorbed into modern European populations, and how the deliberate overlapping and misuse of terminology, be it geographic, racial, ethnographic, genetic, or phenotypic, it constantly is being overlapped to confuse people and to confuse the narrative about Britain and Europe, because there's a desperate need to preserve the whiteness, or at least to, I'm not even, I say preserve the whiteness that has been built up and established over the past 200 years, but actually doesn't go back that far in terms of its historical footprint. So this new narrative of whiteness that we have throughout the European continent is a new construct, and they are desperate to preserve it. But everything in terms of genetics, anthropology, all of the data that's coming out is now dispelling that myth, and they're having to acknowledge the, for want of a better word, the recent multi-ethnic footprint in Europe, and going back even further than that, I would say the solely Black footprint of Europe. And I say that once again, not being like kind of like, oh, everything's, but the narrative and the supporting data suggests that modern populations all descend from Africans, and the Africans that populated the world remained Black for a very, very long time. Okay, they remained Black for a very long time. And so I'm being clear and I'm being transparent about the fact that I'm going to be relatively agendaed, in that obviously I'm going to be presenting data to support that notion. And this is what you're going to get out of this live stream today. It's relatively, I haven't got time to paint the complete picture, but that's the reason why I made this thumbnail and I called it The Real Cheddar Man, because one of the things that you probably know if you've been on the channel for a long time, but one of the things that I've shared is that the reconstruction of Cheddar Man, amongst other things, is a bit of a cope on the part of Eurocentrism. For a lot of far right WSs, W supremacists, who I'm talking about there, for a lot of them, this Cheddar Man reconstruction that you're seeing on the screen is a bridge too far. They are offended. They absolutely, oh my God, how could you make Cheddar Man that chocolate brown? This is a lie. It's not true. And the reality is, as far as it feels like they may have gone with this reconstruction, in my view, they haven't gone far enough. I think this is a far more, and by the way, this isn't I'm not presenting this on the screen as a reconstruction. It's not, this is just something I churned out of AI. So this is just a fully AI image that you're seeing on the screen here. I'm not presenting this as one of my reconstructions. It hasn't gone through any kind of process, but I still feel like this is a closer rendition of Cheddar Man than the one they gave us. And I'm going to give you some data to support why I feel Cheddar Man looked more like this authentic Black person, what we'd associate with the African continent, than this non-existent, anomalous, weird, miscellaneously raced, aracial, hybridized thing that they churned out as a reconstruction. If you were here for was it my last live stream? It might be my last live stream on, this could actually be a really good continuation of the previous live stream, which was about the reconstruction that they did for that character out of Mycenae, that woman. And I'm glad we did that yesterday, because at least what it was, it yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday. At least what it did is it just reminded us how far they'll go to just throw in the phenotype they want into history, the phenotype narrative that they are trying to espouse. They'll throw that into history without having anything to support it. They'll take a skull that has no face and give it a face and call it a reconstruction. Okay, this is literally how far they'll do. And this is a nice little, I say, continuation, because some of the things that I think we established in yesterday's live stream is the fact that clearly they're hiding melanation that was on the European continent, or ignoring it. We saw skulls that looked decidedly, I would say, African or mixed, or, you know, definitely having some kind of black ancestry, being reimagined as totally European. We saw features that we know we associate with melanated people not being associated with melanated people. And this live stream today, I hope, will put some of that into context. Okay, so yeah, that's the kind of, yeah, that's the outlay. I'm not sure if I'm totally ready for this live stream, if I'm going to be totally honest with you, but let's just see how it goes. I hope it's enjoyable, and I hope it's clear. I've like I said, I've kept it relatively lightweight, so I'm hoping that this all goes quite well. So let me, without further ado, just get stuff up on the screen, and we'll just go from there. And fingers crossed, say fingers crossed. So let me get this up on the screen, and let me at this stage full screen it. There we go. All right, so I'm going to full screen. Should I go into slide mode? No, I'm not going to go to slide mode. That'll confuse things. But what I will do is I'll go into full screen mode. View, full screen. Boom. Okay, so there we go. How black was Britain? Okay, this is what we're going to be touching on today. And yeah, I hope that you... Yeah, let me address. So actually, this is a really good point to start, because we're gonna touch on Cheddar Man today. But I'm glad you said this. So this is an example. So it said, Nate's now, thank you for dropping this comment. It says, watch the documentary on Cheddar Man where DNA tests were given regarding the local population, and there are descendants who've been found. False. And I'm not saying you're false, because I've seen a documentary, but I'm saying this is a perfect example of the kind of falsery that they do, the kind of total fallacy that they create. The people who they are claiming are descendants of Cheddar Man are not descendants of Cheddar Man. It's been absolutely verified that Cheddar Man has no descendants in the UK. It's not even a possibility that he has descendants in the UK. Dr. Selena Brace, who did the study on Cheddar Man, confirms this, and I could show you a video. I actually might show you the video of her actually confirming that. What they've done in this study, and they actually, well, not this study, this documentary, remember, they're not going to put this in a study because it won't hold up. What they've done in this documentary and subsequent press releases that they've released to newspapers like the Daily Mail, etc., is they found someone who Cheddar Man shares a uniparental lineage with. So I believe it's his... I can't remember if it's his Y DNA or his mitochondrial DNA, but it's a lineage. So basically, these people in England and Cheddar Man have a shared ancestor going back several thousands of years, which means absolutely nothing, because according to the same geneticists, all people have a shared ancestor going back somewhere between 4,000 and 7,000 years, every human being on the planet Earth, according to Dr. Selena Brace. So a shared ancestor means nothing. They are not descendants. Cheddar Man has no descendants. In fact, it's been stated quite clearly. There have been 2 population replacement events in the UK since Cheddar Man. So these are the kind of deceptions. So I'm so glad you actually posted that, because these are the kind of deceptions they do, and they release these sound bites to the media, just like when we did yesterday's live stream. And did you see how many little deceptions they had in there? Oh, everyone would read that article and be like, oh, well, Helen of Troy has been found and she's been reconstructed. They did her DNA. And if you read the article, none of that is being said. They just put things out there and they allow people to, you know, they allow people to read between the lines and to create another narrative because they know what they're doing is deceptive. So that's actually an excellent way to start. So yeah, thank you for sharing that in the chat. And I will hang my hat on what I've said there to be absolutely true. You can check it. In fact, we'll check out some Dr. Selena Brace if we have some time today. So on that note, on that very pertinent note, let's get started. Now, new study finds builders of Stonehenge were black. So this is a new study, okay? And I thought actually it might be quite interesting for us to just dive straight into this study to begin with, because it's quite an interesting one. So let's just, these are all relatively short articles. So I'm gonna pull up this article, okay? And we're going to go through it because this is quite interesting. And this will give us a nice kind of ground zero for us to start this discussion today. So I'm sure many of you have come across this, and I think I may have even touched on it in a previous live stream recently. Let me accept this and zoom in. So let's go through this today. So Britons were mostly black 5,000 years ago, new study suggests. Now this is significant. What's happened? Okay, this is significant. The Britons responsible for the building of the iconic Stonehenge were probably black, a study suggested. Data from 348 ancient genomes gathered from across Eurasia have been reconstructed by scientists at the University of Ferrara in Italy, which show almost all Europeans had dark skin until around 3,000 years ago. Now, I'm going to highlight that phrase, dark skin, because this is one of the phrases that you'll find not just in the media, but even researchers, qualified professionals with an agenda. And I'm going to say very plainly, there are certain institutions and certain individuals that have a massive agenda out there for falsifying history. But you'll find that this term is very, very loose, this dark skin term, okay? It can mean light tan when they want it to, and it can mean jet black when they want it to. It all depends on what the agenda is. Just like they use it like they use the word swarthy, you know. Swarthy, if you use it strictly, means dark skin, means me. I'm swarthy. But when it comes to them researching their history and finding a king that's swarthy, suddenly swarthy will mean, oh, you know, he went out in the sun and caught a little tan, you know, a little bit of deep cream, you know, they'll change it, you know, and it's the same thing with dark skin. But when dark skin is used, particularly when it's being pulled from a genetic level, they've pulled that term directly from the Hyrasplex model. And that means someone was literally dark skinned, i.e. my complexion, yeah, dark skin, the same way we use dark skin in the black community. That's what it will mean, okay? And this is the thing, so they'll move these things around. So it's really important that we're aware of how they use it, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. With Stonehenge just outside the town of Glastonbury being constructed around 5,000 years ago, experts have said we can assume the builders had dark skin. Now, remember, they're not making that assumption from anything. They're making that assumption, or they're making that conclusion genetically. So that means they've plugged into a model, likely the Hyrasplex model, which we'll go through a little bit later. Sorry, I can't scroll. What's going on? Go away. Okay, there we go. Until around 1,700 years ago, the majority of Europeans had dark skin, the authors of the study say, adding that most of the ancient Greeks and Romans and the Britons who built Stonehenge had dark skin, eyes and hair. Now this is significant, okay? This is very significant. The ancient Greeks and Romans and the Britons who built Stonehenge had dark skin, eyes and hair. And this is something that we have been saying. This is something that you would have heard me say before quite distinctively, to tell you that the Romans that settled York in Britain were black, and they encountered a black population. That is going to sound wild to people. But now this is being confirmed by what we can see here. It's being confirmed by genetic tests. And this is things that have been repeated ad nauseum by quite a few historians of the British Isles, who will tell you that the original people, the Picts, the Celts, all these people who they tell you had red hair and this, that, and the other, were black people. And we're going to read a few quotes soon that's going to support this notion. This is all kind of ringing together. Let me carry on. The study confirms that the shift to lighter skin, thanks to the movement of people to higher latitudes and more vitamin D intake as a result, was slower than previously thought. And this doesn't make any sense, because if they're saying around 1700 years ago, they're saying that somewhere between the Romans landing and where we are now, there was a sudden genetic shift. However, we know there was population replacement events, particularly in the UK, and they know about certain expansions, particularly ones, you know, those of you on the live stream and many of you who do the genetics and stuff like that will know Yamnaya expansions, etc., the Caucasoid expansions. These are the things that created the shift in phenotype. It was nothing to do with an adaptation, because why would they have spent 40? They're saying that Europeans arrived or Africans arrived in Europe 60,000 years ago. Why would they have spent 55? Why would they have spent 58,300 years being black, and then suddenly in the last 1700 years all suddenly evolved white skin? Doesn't make any logical sense. So this is still a bit of coping going on by the way it's being interpreted. They know it's not the kind of like an adaptation as a result of, you know, high latitudes. They know it's got nothing to do with that, because why would it have happened rapidly in the last 2000 years? That doesn't make any sense. Experts are still unsure why the change from darker to light skin was so slow, or slow until it happened. And then when it happened overnight. Once again, doesn't make any sense. However, scientists believe farmers may have compensations for vitamin D deficiencies in their diet with accessible sources such as milk and meat. And let me make it very, very clear. And I don't mean to offend anyone here, but there is absolutely zero evidence that pale skin has an advantage over dark skin in any climate. And I know that people are going to find that very offensive, but that is actually, if you research it, that is actually scientifically a fact. The whole vitamin D thing is actually a fallacy based on the fact that pale skinned people produce more vitamin D as a necessity for the fact that they have less melanin. And so they need to produce more vitamin D to compensate for the lack of vitamins that people with melanin get through the conversion of sunlight and UV into the different things that melanin will convert, the different vitamins and minerals that melanin will convert those things into. So as a result, they produce more vitamin D. So those vitamin D levels that they say you need to have aren't actually universal. So it's another one of those things when they kind of like democratize their standards and tell everyone they need to have it. You're probably not vitamin D deficient. You probably don't need that much vitamin D because you're getting nutrition, you know, internal biological nutrition from other means as a result of your melanin doing lots of different jobs. And these are one of the things that aren't told. So they, you know, I think many scientists are well aware that the whole argument about vitamin D deficiencies in other races who aren't pale skinned, that's not true. It's not true at all. And I'll hang my hat on that as well. Samples for the study were taken from the British Isles, mainland Europe, Russia, Central Asia, and the Middle East. So here's a few pictures of Stonehenge just outside the town of Glastonbury. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. And let's carry on reading. Dr. Silvia Girotto, an evolutionary biologist at the University of Ferrara in Italy, who led the work, told the Telegraph, by analyzing ancient DNA from 348 individuals spanning 45,000 years, we reconstructed, so 45,000 years, why would there be a sudden shift once again? We reconstructed an intricate picture in which light pigmentation emerged sporadically during the first phases of our presence in Europe. First phases of a presence in Europe? Our ancestors had dark skin until very recent times. So what do you mean first phases? This is a contradiction. It says spanning 45,000 years, and I'm assuming these are all European samples. So this just feels like these two sentences contradict each other. So maybe someone could explain what I'm not understanding there. Given that Stonehenge was built during the transition from Neolithic to Bronze Age, and given the high frequency of dark-skinned samples, we inferred for that period, even in Northern Europe, it is likely that Britons who built Stonehenge displayed dark features. Okay, or were different people. Let's just be frank with it. They displayed dark features, or they were a population that is different to the population now. Have you noticed how they won't say that? They won't just come out and say what the data is obviously telling us is that the people who built Stonehenge were clearly a different population to the modern people who occupy this land. History will tell you that. Anthropology will tell you that. But what they'll do when they do these genetic studies, when it suits them, is they will isolate genetics. They'll allow genetics to tell its own tale. We're not interested in the anthropology. We're not interested in the history. We're not interested in what we know took place. All we want is the genetics. All we want is the genetics. So can you see they'll separate it when it suits them, and then when it suits them again, they'll combine them. When it comes to black people, oh yeah, well, we found this African ancestry, so we looked back and we found that there was a slave trade that took place in 656 BC, and that's where these. So when it comes to black genetics, oh yeah, they'll be flicking through the history books or making stuff up. But when it comes to their genetics, kind of like, oh no, all of a sudden amnesia, historical amnesia. You know, oh, they evolved. Their ancestors look different. We don't quite know why. We don't quite know why. Someone was saying something about some kind of population replacement, but that's not relevant to what we're talking about here. You know, continuous moving of goalposts. But let's carry on. Stonehenge is an iconic part of Britain's history. It is largely sealed off to the public, with visitors no longer being permitted to touch the stones, but they are able to walk around the monument from a short distance away. The whole monument, now ruinous, is aligned towards the sunrise on the and sunset on the winter solstice. On the sunrise on the, okay, they've missed out a word there. Large crowds can usually be seen at the monument during the solstice periods, as it is considered a place of worship to neo-druids, pagans, and other earth-based or old religions. English heritage does, however, permit access during the summer and winter solstice and the spring and autumn equinox. Okay, so we get a nice little picture there of these dark-skinned individuals, and they've classified them as dark-skinned based on the genetic information. Okay, so they've done samples, and basically everyone they've pulled out at this time was still, I've got to use inverted commas there, still dark-skinned. Okay, yeah, as it, you know, the implication being they suddenly evolved to become light-skinned if you just ignore everything else. Let's carry on. I'm gonna just quickly pull up this one because I feel like it might have slightly different information. If not, we'll think it. But I remember I put them down here for a reason, so I'm just gonna pull up that study as well. So that article. None of these are studies; these are just articles at the moment. I think this one made me. Is this the one that made me laugh? Let's have a look. So ancient. No, it's funny. GBN. I don't know if you've come across this channel before, but this is like the UK's equivalent to like Fox News, but it's even more right wing. It's like a super right wing channel. So it was nice hearing them cope as they wrote this. But it says ancient Britons who built Stonehenge had dark brown to black skin. Now, this phrase here, dark brown to black, guys, I want you to listen to that and shelve it. Dark brown to black. Once again, that quote, that's not just a thing, that is a specific level of the Hierosplex. Okay, it's a specific there's 5 tiers of the Hierosplex, and dark brown to black is a specific tier of the Hierosplex. It's not just a word they've just kind of like pulled out from nowhere, okay, or a phrase they've just pulled out from nowhere. Let's read. Ancient Britons who built Stonehenge likely had dark skin, according to a new study by scientists at the University of Ferrara, blah, blah, blah. And blah, 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 because I've read this before. Researchers suggest that almost all Europeans had dark skin until about 3,000 years ago, much more recently than previously believed. The study analyzed data from, was there anything else? Sorry. Oh, I think that's it. They kept it really super short. So maybe I didn't put that in there for a good reason. Okay, so we can ignore that. That one didn't really tell us anything new. All right, so that's the kind of headline. All right. And now what we're going to do is just going to look at some other relevant stuff. Okay. So this article saying the ancient Irish were blacks with blue eyes. Okay. That was an article in the Irish Times, and most Britons were mostly black 5,000 years ago. We've just looked at. And this is where I just wanted to point out some observations. I said some logical observations. That's a bit of a subjective statement, because logical to me might not be to everyone else. They might say that actually these are really subjective. But anyway, these are things that I've just noted as being quite important to us moving forward. Like I said to you earlier, this is going to be relatively agendaed, okay? And I'm going to be quite transparent about that. So, you know, deal with it. If you don't, you know, I'm being quite honest about that. But let's have a look through. So it says here, all modern populations with dark to black skin have either African, and I've kind of put a ratio here of around 99%, or South Asian phenotype. Now, the reason I've had to highlight that is because Africans are not the only people that can have dark to black skin. We do have South Asians who can access dark to black skin, particularly populations around, you know, south of Sri Lanka, your Dalit populations, okay? They're able to access dark to black skin as well. So I'm not going to say this is an exclusively African thing, but I am going to stress the fact that a vast majority of people with dark to black skin are of African descent, okay? So that was just one of the things that I wanted to point out there. All modern pygmy populations, aside, and this is relevant as well, aside from the Taron of Myanmar, Burma, have a melanated or black phenotype. So when we're once again talking about pygmies, we have a very, 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 very high likelihood we're dealing with a black population, because a majority of global pygmy populations are black in phenotype, apart from the Taron of Myanmar, these Burman pygmies. So once again, these are kind of Southeast Asians, okay? And they are pygmies as well. But apart from that, a majority of short-statured people are black, okay? Only black Africans have been found to be without or have very, 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 very little Neanderthal admixture. And I will stress, only black Africans have been found to be without or have very little Neanderthal admixture. Okay, so if you're talking about modern populations, black African populations are the only ones who are not admixed. Okay, not admixed, i.e. 100% Homo sapien sapien. Okay. That's to be clear about that. So, a conclusion we can draw from that is that when we come across populations that are 100% or ancient populations that appear to be 100% Homo sapiens sapien, or have very, very, as in minuscule admixture with Neanderthal, it's almost certain that they are going to resemble black Africans. That's almost certain. We already know they're going to be dark-skinned from this study, because pale skin is a recent evolutionary trait that's been admitted. But on top of that, we only find modern Africans who are 100% Homo sapiens sapien. The other thing we can then conclude from that, sorry, Nathan, I should have hidden that comment ages ago. The other thing that we can obviously conclude from that is that the black African is default Homo sapien sapien. So if you're looking for, well, what does 100% Homo sapien sapien look like? Your default is black African. Okay, that's what you're going to get. The truest, closest thing you're going to get to 100% Homo sapien sapien is a black African. That is your default Homo sapien sapien. Okay. Eurocentrists, I put Eurocentrists, this is this flip-flop between African, and this is key, guys. I want to quickly highlight this. Flip-flop between African, North African, Sub-Saharan, Eurasian, as racial, geographic, genotypic, or phenotypic descriptives to keep people confused about Europe's obvious black origins. They will constantly flip-flop between these things. So they'll start off by saying, oh, well, they were African, they weren't black. And then, or they'll say, you know, they were black but not African, or they were African but not sub-Saharan, or they're Eurasian. And we'll leave it at that, but not tell you if they were black or not. And they'll just flip-flop around. And this, when I say Eurocentrist, I'm very much pointing this accusation at academics. Academics use this trick, particularly Krauss, okay? And the what's that institute? The Max Planck Institute. The Max Planck Institute constantly commissions surveys where they utilize these uncontextualized semantics and shift them consistently within a single article to keep people ignorant about what the actual truth is. They do that constantly. Okay. Next, dark skin is subjective, as we've already spoken about, and constantly moving to suit Eurocentric agenda. Okay. So dark skin is subjective and it will constantly move to suit Eurocentric agenda. So dark skin will be as black as night when they need it to be, and will be as pale as an olive skinned man when they need it to be. So on that note, this is a good point to go on to the next, which is, what is dark skin? Okay. Let's delete this. And what I've given you here is Hyrax-Plex versus Fitzpatrick, because I think this is quite important. When the Hyrax-Plex model spits out, well, is fed genetic data, it will spit out one of these 5 tiers for, well, probability. It will give you probabilities against each of these 5 tiers based on the genetic data that it's been given. And these goes from very pale skin color, intermediate skin color, dark skin color, dark to black skin color. And these are literal descriptions. Okay, they're literal. So when it says dark, it means dark in the literal sense, not dark as in dark compared to, which is what they'll do. And what I've done is I've just dragged the Fitzpatrick scale next to this so we can understand where these sit. So when it says very pale, it's probably dealing with those people who are literally white or pink skinned. Okay, pale skin color, you're white maybe with a bit of, you know, your blondes, people with a little bit of color to them. Intermediate skin color, we have light brown to medium brown, this kind of like moderate area. By the time we get to dark, we're talking essentially about black people. Yeah, from caramel to coffee colored. Yeah, that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a very specific range. So when the Hyrax-Plex model spat out and said Europeans were dark to black skin color, they're talking about deeply pigmented people who are from dark brown to literally black. They're not talking about people here, moderate brown, light brown. They're not talking about that when they say dark or dark to black, because they have a tier for that. It's called intermediate. They have a tier for that already. So when you see these reconstructions, when they say, oh, well, Europeans were dark, and then they come up with a reconstruction and you could clearly see it has moderate brown skin, they are not being accurate. They're supposed to go the way of Cheddar Man or darker. That's what they're supposed to do. That's what they're supposed to do. Okay. So let's move on. I hope that's clear to everyone, by the way. The real face of Cheddar Man, and I've put here, there is no such thing as a black-skinned white man. And once again, this isn't me being, I'm not trying to be, upset anybody or be facetious, but there isn't. One of the things that I think is, I tend to work with Occam's razor. I'm like this when it comes to the ancient Egyptians. I don't believe there was a mythical red race of people that no longer exist. I don't believe in mythical races. I don't believe in mythical, I don't. All right. Human variation that we have on this planet is sufficient to explain historic human variation. In other words, if they pull up someone who has dark to black skin, I am going to instantly assume an African phenotype, or I might assume a South Asian phenotype. Those are really the two extremes that I'm willing to go to if someone comes up and it says this person had dark to black skin. I am not going to assume that it was someone who was facially exactly the same as a modern European, as a modern kind of like, Western European, but with black skin, because that person doesn't exist. All right. We're talking about, what's that film that Robert Downey Jr. was in when he was in blackface? Yeah. There's no such thing as historic population of whites in blackface. That is just a cope. And we can see this with Cheddar Man, because Cheddar Man actually has a lot of clues to suggest he was your run-of-the-mill black person. Okay, Tropic Thunder. Thank you, Blue Man Visions. Yeah, we're not doing Tropic Thunder here. Okay, we're dealing with real human beings. All right, and there's a few things about Cheddar Man's reconstruction that they either didn't know or refused to kind of point out when they started doing the reconstruction. So the first thing is, Cheddar Man's cephalic index is 72. Okay, and that's distinctly paradoxical to modern Brits. I'm not even going to go to the extent to say he's got a 72, by the way, is dolichocephalic strongly. That's like extreme dolichocephaly. All right. And you can see here, this is from the original Flintjack cave study where Cheddar Man was actually, first studied. Okay. And you can see here his cranial index, which is made by obviously dividing its breadth by its length, is 71.7. Okay. That is extreme dolichocephaly, a very, very long skull. And you wouldn't guess that by looking at it from the front, would you? The reconstruction, but he has a very long skull. Now, I'm not even going to argue the fact that this means he's African, because I don't draw that conclusion. I always say we have a higher probability of people being dolichocephalic if they're from Africa, because it's so common there as opposed to the rest of the world where it's extremely rare. But what I will say is that this is paradoxical to modern Brits. Okay, unless you can pull out the modern Brits that have a cephalic index of 72 that don't have a physical disability, then you have to acknowledge that, hey, this is strange. So we can't just make him look like the rest of us because we don't have that trait. Because now that's two traits you don't have, and two traits that can be found very easily amongst people who are phenotypically black. Okay, let's move on. Cheddar Man's ignored curly hair. Okay, this is from the National History Museum website. However, Cheddar Man has the genetic markers of skin pigmentation usually associated with sub-Saharan Africa. This discovery is consistent with a number of Mesolithic human remains discovered throughout Europe. Okay, so once again, another article being very clear and being very transparent that Mesolithic human beings across Europe have skin pigmentation that's associated with quote unquote sub-Saharan Africa. Modern day British people share approximately 10% of their genetic ancestry with the European population to which Cheddar Man belonged to. So not Cheddar Man specifically or directly, but the population that he belonged to, i.e. an earlier ancestor, and only 10% of their ancestry, by the way. But they aren't, and let me stress, they are not direct descendants. Okay. Current thinking is that the Mesolithic population that Cheddar Man belonged to was mostly replaced by the farmers that migrated to Britain later. Okay, so there's another key point about Cheddar Man. All right. Once again, there's no such thing as a black-skinned white man. Let's carry on. The real face of Cheddar Man. Cheddar Man cephalic index 72. We've already spoken about that. Let's get another quote. They found the Stone Age Briton had dark hair with a small probability that it was curlier than average. Where has that gone in the reconstruction? Blue eyes and skin were that was probably dark brown to black in tone. Dark brown to black in tone, we've already discussed, means the last layer of the high-risk plex model. But the curlier than average hair is totally not present in the reconstruction. That's just normal, uncombed Caucasian hair that they've given him there, okay? Curlier than average hair could be anything, okay? They could be talking about kinky hair there. They've just been very careful in the way that it's been phrased. But the point being is that there is no such thing as a black-skinned white man. I will reiterate that over and over again. Cheddar Man was just a black man, okay? This is a cope. And I've already shown you, I'm not going to show you again. I've shown you guys a million times that the reconstruction looks exactly like the reconstruction artist. It looks like their long lost black brother. So there was clearly kind of like some kind of a familiarity, facial typism that was going on when they made the reconstruction. Once again, I'm not gonna shit on them. Everyone has been influenced by Eurocentrism to such a large degree. It's really hard to find people that, you know, can't help but to kind of like act out in the way that they've been educated. So I'm sure there was nothing malicious when those reconstruction artists in particular. Other people I'm stricter about, like Krauss, he's an idiot. But when other professionals do their job, sometimes they're just doing what is logical to them because of the way they've been educated, you know. Sorry, that gets a quick flash on the screen. Cheddar Man had revitiligo like Uncle Ruckus. Yeah, that's good. I get blacker. Anyway, let's move on. All right, so let's move on to some quotes about the British Isles. Now that we've established that there's no such thing as a black-skinned white man, and we've established that we have a high probability of black presence in the UK being dominant for a large part of its history, as confirmed by the science, let's now read a few quotes, okay, that will hopefully start putting things into context about how historians see this. So J.A. Rogers, Nature Knows No Colonines, quote says, "There's reason to believe that there were Negroes in Britain before Julius Caesar. Irish folklore mentions a small black people, the Firbolg, a very ancient British saying, according to Burton Stevenson, is black as a blowman." Now, blowman means bloomin', and that was one of the old names given to very, very, very dark-skinned black people. Godfrey Higgins, Gerald Massey, and Dave McRitchie have written of these British Negroes. We do know that the Phoenicians, a Negroid people, that's something that I'm sure people want to argue with these days, did mine tin in Cornwall, and that Egyptians went to Britain before the Romans. The Silures, or Western Britons, mentioned by Tacitus of the 1st century as having dark skin and unusually curly hair, were very likely of Phoenician or Egyptian descent. Okay. Ancient Welsh folktales certainly do mention black people. So this is another quote from the same book. In the story of Peredur in the Mabinogion, I'm not going to try and pronounce that. The blacks mentioned therein might be Silures. Another ancient Welsh poem, Gwath Yud E More, tells of a rivalry between white and black. White and black. So more is more here. Yud and more. So I think that means white and black. I'm not sure. I'm not Welsh. Rome had Negroes in her armies to Britain. Well, it sounds like what's being confirmed now is that the entire Roman population that came to Britain were black, and the worship of black goddess Isis and her Negro priests followed the Roman army there. Now, obviously, J.A. Rogers was obviously writing as best he could for the time. And I think there's more, I think we can be a bit more direct about the way we address this now because we have more data. But let's read on some more quotes. Quotes from historian Dave McRitchie. So as far as complexion goes, there can be no doubt as to the presence of a vast infusion of coloured, quote unquote, blood. There are, of course, no living Britons who are as black as Negroes. So this is he obviously wrote this in his own time. Okay, so I think we're talking about the late 19th century, early 20th century. But some are as dark as mulattoes and many darker than Chinese. So that's so even not just a few less than a couple hundred years ago, he's saying that Britain has a high mulatto population, and this is actually supported by artwork of the time as well. You'll see mixed race people a lot in British artwork who they say, oh, they're the descendants of Africans, and it's very likely they're descendants of British people. I actually have this is something I haven't shared with you guys before, but my brother-in-law's mum is a black Brit. She's one of the orphans. She's mixed race, and she's one of the war orphans. But that's a whole nother study that we're going to go into another time. Let me carry on. No ethnologist could detect the presence of other blood, and yet in both cases, the male descendant would bear the same surname, signifying the black man. You may see faces of a distinctly Mongolian and even of a Negroid caste in British families whose pedigree may be traced for many generations, without disclosing the slightest hint of extra British blood. Another quote: fairy humorism, that's it. Fairy humorism, as developed by McRitchie, attempted to rationally explain the origin of fairies in British folklore and regards fairies as folk memory of small-statured pre-Celtic race. So remember what we said earlier about small-statured people. I just got a few more quotes to read, and then we're going to be moving on to a bit more of the data. So do bear with me. So this is from Ancient and Modern Britons. I'm going to read this quote about the Iberians. I'm going to zoom in if it allows me to. Let me. Yeah, it does. Okay, cool. So let me zoom in here. The Iberians are styled swarthy and curly-haired. The word swarthy is rather elastic, for although literally Schwarz, which means black, yet it is taken, I fancy, to mean something not quite so dark as the color of a Negro. Bear in mind, so bear with me. It's in its usual exception. Perhaps the distinction does not exist, but at any rate, if the small dark Highlander and the black Celt to the west of the Shannon be assumed to be descendants of Iberians, it may, when he's talking about Iberians here, he's talking about Ibermeresians. So these are the original black Moors of the UK, or that black population that came from that region into the UK. It may fairly be argued, with so much intermixture with fairer races during the last 2,000 years, the stock must now be lighter skinned than then, and its representatives of the first century must have been actually as black as Negroes. As a matter of fact, Pliny characterizes their complexion as Ethiopian. Okay, so Pliny is quite clear about the people from the British Isles being Ethiopian, that is, as black as an Ethiopian. And it may be that the curliness of their hair was of the same nature as a Negro's also. Thus, the Negritos of Huxley, the owners of such skills, as those found in Caithness, may have been allied to the ancient Iberians. That the wild tribes of Ireland were black men is hinted by the fact that a wild Irishman is in Gaelic a black Irishman. Dub, I'm not going to say that other word, Erenak or something like that. And that some of the natives of Scotland, as well as of England, were of this race also is evident when one remembers that, according to Skene, the powerful tribe of Damnonai, which was the chief of the Confederacy of the Métis or something like that, or marsh dwellers, who were a part of the Picti or Caledonii, were probably relations of their namesakes of southwestern Britain, which indeed is almost a certainty if nomenclature goes for anything. Therefore, the British Picts resembled the Ugrian Picts and the Tasmanian and other kindred Picts, not only in the using of, and this, I think that's all I've got for that quote. So here's another one. Excuse me. In reciting the victories of the Roman general Theodosius, Claudian says, Ille Yeves Mauros nec falso nomine pictos edomuit. Now, when Claudian wrote, and for a long time after, Maurus, which is the original where we get Moors from, signified a great deal more than a native of Mauritania. Or it may be more correct to say that Mauritania implied as much, though in a different quarter as Scythia did. Any Latin dictionary, any old one at least, will tell you that Maurus is a Moor, a blackamoor, or a tawny Moor. And Shakespeare uses the word Moor as a synonym for Negro. As that last word bears nowadays a somewhat restricted meaning, it may be better to take the old-fashioned blackamoor as the nearest English rendering of Maurus, signifying thereby any black or brown-skinned man. Consequently, the translation of Claudian's line is this: he subdued the nimble blackamoors, not wrongly named the painted people, and the British Picts, like those of other lands, stand out again as dark-skinned men. A complementary witness with Maurus is Gorm found. So I think we've got a couple more quotes. I hope I'm not losing any of you guys. Bear with me because we are going somewhere with this. It's just important to kind of paint this picture. Hit the likes up if you're not getting too bored. The word is given to Gaelish dictionaries as signifying blue of whatever shade and also green as grass. And this recalls the fact that the indigenous tribes described by Caesar were styled both verdes, green, and curule, blue, from the woad which they stain their bodies, the color of which may come under either of these headings. Accordingly, when one looks again into the Gaelic dictionary, one finds that Gorman is woad. Plainly, therefore, a man who is titled Gorm is a woad-stained man. Now, although the Gaelic of Scotland, a Negro is known as Duin Dob, a black man, he is known in the Gaelic of Ireland as Duin Gorm, a blue, green, or woad-stained man. And while in the Scottish Highlands, an adjective for glass is used to signify both swarthy and green, in Wales it has the meaning of green or blue. And in the later country, the Gaelic gorm, here spelled gorm, is equivalent to brown. What possible explanation for all this apparent confusion of terms can there be, except that the painted one that a brown-skinned man and a woad-colored man were one and the same. So what he's saying here is essentially people could be called black, green, blue for some reason, and this all essentially meant black. So when we're talking about blue, we're probably talking about that very blue black, that very deep black. But that's the conclusion that he has come to. Let's carry on. This is my last long quote. It gets much quicker from here, but let's just read through all of these. The consideration of this word and the localization of races thus named is not irrelevant at this point, for although it may not be easy to trace their route hither and the date of their arrival, a branch of this family did inhabit Britain and are not only known as Maori and Moors, but also as Moravianses, identical with the name of those in India, Murray men and people of Moray or Moravia. This name Moravia was given to two districts in Scotland, one the most important in the north central and the other in the southern portion of the country, that the Picts, known to the Romans as Maori, were finally divided into two sections, inhabited these localities, is a speaking fact which it is well to which is well to remember at this juncture. The smaller district in the south has been the name father of a family distinguished in Scottish history, the Murrays of Philip Fogg in Selkirkshire, whose ancestor Archibald of Moravia was amongst those who subscribed to the oath of fealty to Edward I of England in 1296. One of the estates of this clan bore the significant name of the Black Barony. Of course, the race of Archibald de Moravia may have been that of an intruded army and may not necessarily be that of the Moravianenses, as he was simply Archibald, Lord of Moravia. Sir Charles A. Murr, who fought at Chevy Chase of the same clan, shows in the name of the modern form or approximately, but the principal territory of the Moravia, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so, all right. That's the bulk of the long quotes out of the way. There's a couple shorter ones before we kind of dive back into what we were doing before. But I do think that these quotes are important. So now we're going to dive into another author. This is Godfrey Higgins from his work called Anacalypsis. And let's read these three quotes. So in volume 1 of Anacalypsis, Higgins observes, in my essay on the Celtic Druids, I have shown that a great nation called the Celtae, of whom the Druids were the priests, spread themselves almost over the whole earth and are to be traced in their rude, gigantic monuments from India to the extremity of Britain, who these can have been but the early individuals of the black nation of whom we have been treating, I know not, and in this opinion I am not singular. So he's saying he's not the only person who believes that the Druids and these people were descendants of black people. Next quote. The learned Morris says Cushites, i.e. Celts, built the great temple in India and Britain. So he's there putting Celts as descendants or essentially a derivative of Cushites and Britain, and excavated the caves of the former. And the learned mathematician Reuben Borrow has no hesitation in pronouncing Stonehenge to be a temple of the black curly-haired Buddha. And finally, Osiris and his bull were black. All the gods and goddesses of Greece were black. Please take note of that, guys. All the gods and goddesses of Greece were black. This is something I've pointed to before. At least this was the case with Jupiter, Bacchus, Hercules, Apollo, Ammon, the goddess Venus, Isis, Hecate, Diana, Juno, Metis, Ceres, Sybil are black. And we haven't even included Zeus there, who we know was called Zeus Ethiop. So there's just a bit of idea about the blackness of Europe during this time. Okay. So I've just kind of like highlighted a few key things here. I'm going to skip over this so I can never finish putting the dates in. Okay. And this is what we're going to move on to next. Okay. So I just want to quickly shout out Citizen of the World, $10 donation. Thank you very much. New study in Nature about DNA of ancient Greek Sahara mummies. It shows they were black. Just Google this skeletons from the Green Sahara offer genetic peak at a lost human population. What's interesting is about that new study at Nature. I think this is another, I'm going to say hack job by Max Planck Institute and Krauss, if it's the same one that we're looking at, is that they use the term sub-Saharan very selectively, and they try to draw a distinction between the population of the Green Sahara and sub-Saharan Africans. And they do this through a lot of trickery, essentially by only giving sub-Saharan Africa, that is people below the Sahara right now in Africa, only assigning genes to them that they hold totally uniquely. But any genes that they share with populations of the Sahara, which is loads, by the way, and populations of Europe, they will always give to those places. So they'll never turn around and say, North Africans are carrying sub-Saharan genes if they both share it. If they both share it, they'll literally call them North African genes. And they do this almost across the board with anything that touches the European continent, instantly becomes European. So in the end, what we have is the most genetically diverse place on the planet, being sub-Saharan Africa, being seen as the most genetically small place on the planet. And Europe being the most genetically, I don't want to say the most genetically restricted, I don't want to say inbred, but the most genetically restricted place on the planet, being Europe, being seen as the most genetically diverse. This is how they're reversing. So all of these genetics that they've inherited from Africans, they are claiming as their own. Limited, thank you, that's a much nicer word. Limited, nerve large. The most genetically limited place is seen in all of these studies as being the most genetically diverse. This is very, very deliberate. Okay, it doesn't happen by accident. So, Citizen of the World, thank you for sharing that. We actually might touch on that study a little bit today. Okay, so this one here, I've said hunter-gatherer populations of Europe, and study here says the questionable contribution of the Neolithic and Bronze Age to European craniofacial form. Now, this study is done by CeeLo Embrace, and I will tell you right now, CeeLo Embrace is not woke. Okay, to all of those far right people who use the word woke negatively. All right, he's not in any ways sympathetic to the black cause. In fact, I would say he's probably second only to Krauss in the amount he tries to Europeanize his results. His study Clines and Clusters was a hack job on the ancient Egyptian phenotypic expressions, and it tried its very best to make it seem like ancient Egyptians were phenotypically closer to Europeans, which is absolutely ridiculous because it ignored all of the cranial traits and focused purely on the width of the nasal region. So that's his backdrop. But even he has had to admit in this study about the ancient populations of, the Neolithic populations of Europe and the Middle East being closely aligned to Africans. So let me just read a quote here, and I'll open up the study briefly as well so we can have a quick look at it. But it says here, it is a further surprise that the Epipaleolithic Natufian of Israel, so these are the Natufians that they like to go on and on about, from whom the Neolithic realm was assumed to arise, has a clear link to sub-Saharan Africa. And when I say a clear link to sub-Saharan Africa, that is an understatement. Okay. He did many phenotypic comparisons. This is based purely on craniofacial measurements, by the way. Okay, so these are phenotypic measurements based on craniofacial measurements. So we're looking at the way these look. Who do these people physically resemble? Okay, this is not a genetic study. This is who do these people physically resemble? And they consistently clustered close to black populations, particularly those not called Niger Congo. In fact, they're literally right alongside Niger Congo. That is your modern Central West Africans, essentially. So the Natufians, okay, who are responsible essentially for bringing all of that advancement to Europe and Asia, and for seeding many of the civilizations we talk about now. I think Göbekli Tepe being one of them. These people were physically Central West African. That's what they physically were, i.e. if you looked at their face, that's what you would have seen. Okay, so we have them, and I want to kind of draw your attention to a few things. So over here you'll see they're right alongside Niger Congo populations. On this one in particular, you'll see they're up here, and you'll say, oh well, look, they're up against populations you wouldn't expect here. But if you look carefully, we have Mongolia in the Bronze Age. We have Taforat. We'll come on to that later. We have Mesolithic. One second, move this over just a little bit. Mesolithic France. So we're talking about early European population, European Upper Paleolithic, and Greek Bronze Age. So straight away people go, oh, well, those are all white populations. No, they're not. That's what we're finding out from this study. So it's clustering, even on this one, which is one out of the four, it still clusters alongside old European populations, not new ones. Here's the new European populations. They're miles away. Okay. England, Norway, they are nowhere near. Okay. Let's have a look at a couple more. You can see here Natufian clustering essentially closer to Niger Congo than any other group. And the same over here, Natufian here clustering next to Nubia, Bronze Age, Nubia. Okay, so always clustering next to black populations, essentially. So this is just craniofacial measurements we're talking about here. But what does that prove to us? That proves to us that on a physical level, and this is coming from an academic who is not sympathetic to the black cause whatsoever, not sympathetic to Afrocentrism. In fact, he's done his best to create distance, and even he couldn't create distance between the physical proportions of Natufian population with essentially Central West Africans. That would be your Nigerians, Cameroonians, Congolese, etc. These are the people who would be classified as Niger Congo. Okay. So when people talk about Natufians, regardless of what they might try and tell you about their genetic data, and we're going to come on to because there's more about the Natufians that we're going to find out. Okay. Regardless of what they try and tell you about the Natufians' genetic data, the fact of the matter is they physically resembled modern Central West Africans. And on top of that, their genetic data will give us some more clues towards that as well. So let's move on. So Beachy Head Lady, going back to Britain again, because I think it's really important that we focus in on Britain here, because that's what I wanted to draw most of my comparisons with today. Okay, we want to talk about Britain. So I'm going to show you this video first of all, okay, on Insta. So I'm going to show you this video, and then from there we'll move on. So let me pop this video up. I hope it plays. I haven't tested this. So bear with me. Oh, I have to log in. I don't have a login. I don't know. I have my Instagram logins. Okay, let me try another window. So guys, just give me 1 second as I get this sorted. I forgot you have to log into Insta. Okay, there you go. What happened? Okay, there. Put the sound on.
She became known as Beachy Head Woman, and Joe had one last trick up his sleeve to help identify her. He called in a forensic pathologist to reconstruct her face.
So here is. This is Beachy Head Woman, yes. The biggest surprise of them all was that it was clear that she was actually sub-Saharan African in origin.
So
let me just pause it there. It's clear that she was sub-Saharan African in origin. Now, bear in mind, they're making this conclusion based on her physical traits and appearance. That was based on the fact that they got a skull and it was like, okay, this is clearly a black person. This isn't based on genetic data. It's not based on any of that. It's enough for them to say, well, this skull belongs to a black person. We don't have skulls like this amongst our modern European population. Okay, so it's really important you remember that, because there's been a massive cope when it comes to Beachy Head Lady.
Black Britain.
Yes, yes. And as far as we know, the earliest Black Briton.
So she's the same as me.
So that was false over there. Well, she said as far as we know. So I'm not sure if this predated the Cheddar Man revelation, but this is obviously maybe done at a time when the floodgates hadn't opened and British people hadn't been bombarded with the fact that everyone was black from Britain not too long ago. So yeah, back when bear in mind, Beachy Head Lady is only 1700 years old, so this is like AD 300 she dates to. She's not that old. Okay, this is a relatively modern Brit. Okay,
she's somebody who is both, but who spent their life in this country.
Yeah, just 1700 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to show you that. So that's when they first did their first study on Beachy Head Lady, and obviously stuff like that, as people have has pointed out, upset people. So what you found is, just like with Cheddar Man, you had this massive campaign, because what happened is when Beachy Head Lady was found, they put this plaque up, and I feel like this plaque was put up deliberately to kind of like wind people up, and it says the remains of Beachy Head woman were found near this site of African origin. She lived in East Sussex and at the 3rd century AD. And what's interesting about this is I think Ivory Bangle Lady predates Beachy Head Lady, and I think they, in terms of when they found it, and they always knew she was black. So they do these things and they create these kind of like headlines. But I want to go through exactly. I want to go through exactly what happened with Beachy Head Lady, because it's actually quite amusing. Okay, so let me now post you the update, the latest update with Beachy Head Lady, so you can see how hard these guys cope. Okay, so if you weren't aware, so first Black Britain turns out was a woman likely from Cyprus. Okay, so let's read through this together, and let's read through what Eurocentric coping. Okay, so once again we have that plaque, and we have, notice how do you notice how this bust, this reconstruction, is getting lighter and lighter and lighter? Do you notice that? Okay, it's getting lighter and lighter. When it's first done, okay, oh, she was definitely sub-Saharan, and it didn't even look sub-Saharan African. Look at the lips they gave her. Those she looks dehydrated. The reason she looks dehydrated is because they try to give her the thinnest lips possible. She clearly has black features. This is the skin color that should be given, and her lips should be much thicker than that. But they'll do whatever they can to water it down as much as possible. This should be a dark skin. They're saying she's sub-Saharan, and then they're presenting you with this kind of like a racial Brazilian looking woman. Okay, if you said she's sub-Saharan based on her skull, make her look like a black woman. I hate that word sub-Saharan, but you know what it means when you're saying it. So why are you doing this coping for? Because you can't cope with the fact that you need to make a dark-skinned black woman with full features. You don't want to. You're desperate not to. But anyway, let's read this article, because I want to show you how actually hilarious this is. So, the first Black Briton that lived in an English village 1800 years ago turns out to be most likely a lady from Cyprus, according to DNA analysis. Okay, so let's bear in mind what they said. They never said that she was African. They said that she had phenotypic traits that resembled an African. Yeah. So it's very possible that all that could be true, and she could still be black, is the point. The ancient skeleton discovered in Beachy Head, East Sussex, lived during the Roman period around 125 to 245 AD. She died when she was very young, probably only about 20 to 21, and we don't know how she died. There's no evidence of disease or any wounds. She would have stood between 4'9" and 5'1" tall. DNA analysis of the remains of the woman by Crick Institute found that although she was born in the Eastbourne area of Britain, her ancestry was Southern European, most likely from Cyprus, and not from Africa as initially believed. Now, no one believed or even said that she was from Africa to begin with. They said, we're looking at her and she looks like this skull shares a phenotype with sub-Saharan Africans. That doesn't mean she has to come from Africa. That's your Eurocentric coping. She could have been and was likely wholly indigenous to the UK. She's likely more indigenous to UK than any white Brit that's over there, than any modern European that's there. Her ancestors had likely been there hundreds, if not thousands of years. And yes, someone said she looks mixed. Of course she does. That's what they intended to do with the reconstruction, because they're coping. She's not supposed to look mixed, is the point. So the point being is that this woman is supposed to be fully black. All right. And this is what they do. They move the goalposts. Oh, she's black, so give her a bit of color and curl up her hair a little bit, and that will be enough to suggest that she's black. Yeah, this is what they did with Cheddar Man. They create these hybrids because they can't accept with the data that they're being shown. Okay, so this is what you call a red herring or a straw man. Okay, not from Africa. No one said she was from Africa. In fact, they did an isotope analysis, and the isotope analysis will basically tell you where someone has lived, what kind of foods they've eaten. It will give you kind of like the biological information you need, but doesn't go into any genetics to tell you where someone has lived. And her isotope analysis said that she was British. She was there. She lived her whole life there. She had not come from somewhere else. So you feel in a need to relocate her to the African continent because she's black is just your own ignorance. Okay. Plague honoring Pluck. That's what you say, Pluck. Honoring first Black Briton removed. So this is like, this is like the satisfaction for the W supremacists must have been massive here. A plaque installed by the BBC honoring Beachy Head Lady. And by the way, BBC probably did that on purpose with the view of removing it down the line because they're idiots. In the village of Eastdean has since been removed. The plaque was placed in East Sussex Village by BBC as part of their 2016 Black and British series, where they billed the woman as the earliest Black Briton. Well, we knew in 2016 that's not even correct, because we know that there were Black Britons in 2016 predating her. So even when they put this up, they knew they were lying, because Ivory Bangle lady they've known was black for ages. Okay, and she was British as well, claiming she was of African origin. So what is it? Is she British or is she African? Which one is it? Because you're calling her a Black Brit. So why call her a Black Brit if you think she came from Africa? Well, you didn't. This is all about the confusion you try to create with this nonsense. The now removed plaque read, "The remains of Beachy Head woman were found near this site, of African origin." Incorrect. You shouldn't have put that. She lived in East Sussex, 2nd and 3rd century. She is a native Brit, a native Black Brit, more native than any of you. It had been installed at the village's East Dean Cricket Club, close to where archaeologists had discovered the 1800-year-old remains of the woman. In the BBC programme, fronted by historian David Olusugar, so I think that's the guy that you just saw, so he must be mixed race, half black, the Beachy Head lady was presented as being of sub-Saharan African origin. No, they said that she resembled sub-Saharan, okay? And you were surprised by the fact that she resembled sub-Saharans, but origin didn't come into it because we didn't have any genetic data with a reconstruction of her features. It was one of several plaques installed by the BBC series to honour Black Britons across history. An article by Joe Seaman, a Beachy Head expert who carried out initial research into the remains, was updated in 2022 to include the note. DNA analysis has since concluded that although she grew up in Eastbourne, the place of her ancestry is in southern Europe, most likely Cyprus. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because even that is not entirely true. But we already know from what we're studying today that everyone in Europe was black in that, well, around that time anyway. So the Cypriots would have been black. So she could have been from Cyprus. She could have been a Paleolithic Cypriot in terms of her ancestry. It wouldn't have changed the fact that she was physically black. She could have had Natufian ancestry. It wouldn't have changed the fact that she was physically black. She could have been of Ibero-Mauritian ancestry. It wouldn't have changed the fact that she was physically black, because black people inhabited the world. It's not that difficult. But when your supremacist mindset, and when you think the whole world revolves around you, and you can't acknowledge what your own science is telling you, that we all expanded from Africa and everyone was physically black until very recent, you do not want to acknowledge these facts. You make these weird cream-colored reconstructions when you've already acknowledged that someone has a black sub-Saharan skull, but no one from sub-Saharan Africa looks like this. No one from sub-Saharan Africa looks like that. So why make that skull? It doesn't make any sense. Let's carry on. The mystery remains as to how the woman from Cyprus ended up in a small village in England. Before the First World War, very few Cypriots migrated to the UK, and the British Cypriot population at the time was around 150, according to historian Stavros Panteli. Migration from Cyprus to the UK has occurred in part due to the colonial. Why are you talking about that? What's that got to do with anything? She's dated back to AD 25 or something. Oh, goodness. Let me carry on. Migration peaked at the time of independence, but has continued on a smaller scale. So even in their own article, they're talking absolute nonsense. Okay. So let me quickly give a shout out and a thank you to Jonathan, who's given a $2 donation. He said, and they still don't have genetic data. Well, they do have some. Okay. And actually, we're going to come on to that because this is actually really interesting. The rabbit hole gets a bit deeper, guys, with this beachy head woman, because this is quite hilarious. So here's the truth that they tried to hide. Okay. This is the little bit that they tried to hide. So that's the propaganda that they put out there, and allowed all the news media to run with it, and everyone be with their anti-woke agendas. Oh, look, you said this woman was African, you had to remove it. First black Brit. She was Greek. She weren't black at all. Well, let's have a look at that. Let's have a look at that. So the beachy head lady, or beachy head woman, let me zoom in a little bit so you guys can read this with me. I won't zoom. Sorry. Discovered in Beachy Head, East Sussex, the Beachy Head woman lived during the Roman period around 200-250 AD, and due to numerous skeletal traits, remember what we said, guys? Numerous skeletal traits was thought to have originated in sub-Saharan Africa. So, due to her skeletal traits, they assumed her to be black, which was correct. Her skeleton hasn't changed. Her DNA might have more data, but it doesn't change the fact that she is a black woman. She's skeletally black. Okay, that's a fact. They can't move that away. They can't unblack her. Beachy Head lady was thought to be the first known person of sub-Saharan origin in Britain. False again. Okay, this has been written since Cheddar Man. Okay, so black people were there already. Sub-Saharan is a misnomer. Once again, there's nothing pointing her to south of the Sahara, when there's plenty of black people all across Europe, all across Africa during this time. Do you understand how stupid this is? What they do, okay, to try and write us out of history? They're using sub-Sahara as a weapon there. I want you to note that. Let's carry on. Following DNA analysis by the Crick Institute, it has now been determined that Beachy Head woman is very likely to be from Cyprus. But it doesn't end there. Listen to the rest of the sentence. Although the markers that initially signaled a sub-Saharan origin are still an intriguing anomaly. Oh, they're an anomaly, are they? Oh, well, we've determined she's from Cyprus. However, she does have these really distinctively black African genetic markers pointing to sub-Saharan Africa, but they're an anomaly. We can't explain those. So you've just decided she's from Cyprus, even though she's skeletally sub-Saharan and has the genetics to match. But the genetics are an anomaly because we've decided, because she's in England, she must be from Cyprus. Interesting. Isn't it interesting how they always do this? Isn't it interesting how the black genetic component is always anomalous? It's always explained away. It can never be the thing, can it? It can never be the reason. It's always the other. Well, she has Cypriot and sub-Saharan ancestry, so therefore she must be Cypriot. Absolute joke. This is exactly how they write black people out of history. This is how they do it. This is how they do it. As part of the Eastbourne Ancestors Project, over 300 sets of human remains excavated from Anglo-Saxon cemeteries were re-examined. Heritage officer, so re-examine, what does that mean? Does that mean they're going to try and use genetics to steal their blackness? Because that seems to be what they're doing here. Heritage officer Joe Seaman and his team found 2 boxes labeled Beachy Head, something to do with 1956 or 1959. Inside, they found a very well preserved human skeleton. Initial inspection by an osteoarchaeologist reported that the remains belonged to a young female who was about 5 feet tall. Okay, so there you go. I did tell you the plot thickens. These people will do anything to write black people out of history, particularly when it comes to Europe. And that is just the fact. And let's put some meat on those bones now. In fact, let's put some meat on those bones. I have Cesare Marias, of all people, to thank for this article, because he posted this to refute me during our discussion regarding Amenhotep III. But I thought, I'm definitely going to use that article, okay, because it actually proves a point. I've put here, there is no such thing as European DNA. Now, that might sound inflammatory to you, but I want you to listen to that in the context of what I've been saying to you before about the fact that anything that is shared between Europeans and Africans will ultimately be classified as being European. Anything that's shared between white people and black people will be classified as being white owned. They are the, according to the way they analyze data, we are the genetically narrow and they are the genetically broad. They have all the markers, all of the ancestry. Europeans have it. They just need it to appear and it's theirs. Okay. Africans have it in spades. Oh, it's because of a back migration. It's because of this. It's because of that. Because apparently Africans only have this tiny handful of E markers, this tiny little handful of E markers. And that defines all of Africa. Okay. All of the other markers that Africa has, oh, back migration, oh, Europeans carried it back. It's a nonsense. And this article proves it. Okay. This article absolutely proves it. So let me read this article to you because this typifies everything that I've been saying. And I don't think this guy is an anomaly. I think he's just one of many people who we need to start highlighting to show the flaw in them trying to weaponize genetics against us. Neguinho de Beja Flor has more European genes. Now, I want you to look at this guy because he's darker than me and he probably has more African features than me. Okay? This is a very, very black man, a very dark-skinned African man, or African-looking man, I should say. Neguinho de Beja Flor, the samba singer from Rio de Janeiro who uses skin color as his stage name, is genetically more European than African. According to an analysis of his DNA carried out at the request of BBC Brazil as part of the Afro-Brazilian Roots Project, according to its analysis, 67.1% of Luis Antonio Falangio, blah, 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 genes originated in Europe and only 31.5% Africa. So what does that tell you? Remember, this guy's not an anomaly. He's not sitting there. He's not like some guy who just came out dark-skinned randomly from 2 light-skinned Brazilian parents. This is someone who both of his parents are as black as him, and they've produced a black child. But somewhere down the line, 67.1% of their ancestry is being classified as being European. And people would say, well, European means white. The question is, who were the first Europeans? And do many Africans carry that original European ancestry and exhibit black-skinned phenotype as they are the originators of those genes? He is likely related to the originators of those genes, which they are now classifying as European because they also carry it. This absolutely proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are classifying far too much as being European, and it's a fallacious category. You cannot take and racialize genetics the way that they are doing it. You can't. European, me, a black guy like that, he said, pointing to himself, and in a tone somewhere between amused and suspicious upon hearing the results of the saliva sample he sent to Gene Laboratory run by geneticists, blah, 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 blah. Before learning the surprising conclusion to the test, the samba singer had bet that he must be 70 to 90% African and that he would not have a single European gene. I don't have blue eyes. I don't have straight hair. So these are all of the signals that they tell you, okay, belong to them. I don't have anything white here from Europe, nothing, he said. And he's 2/3 European, according to the genetics. He knows his parents. He knows where he comes from, okay? That's the way that their genetics work, okay? That's how it works. Claim everything, regardless. All right, so that, without a doubt, you can see there what the suggestion is there, okay? That people can carry high amounts of these European markers and still be wholly black. Africans who carry those markers likely originate those markers and aren't results of back migrations. Not in every case, but I would say in a large amount of cases. Let's carry on. So Beachy Head Lady proves people who are 100% black and 100% Eurasian according to modern DNA interpretation. Okay, so we have Beachy Head Lady, first of all, who they're saying has come back. Whoa, she's Greek. She's genetically Greek. Well, she's physically black, just like this guy. They're not anomalies, just like this guy. Oh, well, he's genetically European. Well, he's physically black. So what are you going to do with that? The attempt to weaponize these kind of like terms against black people as though these people are physically black. Beachy Head Lady is not mixed race. She's black. They just coped with the reconstruction. Okay, let's read this. Our osteo hadn't picked up, but Caroline subsequently had looked at it by 2 more experts who agreed, without being prompted, that this individual, so we're talking about Beachy Head Lady here, that this individual showed many traits of being a sub-Saharan African person. This person who they have classified as Greek was black. Okay. They were 100% sure that this was the origin of this lady. So once again, they have to take sub-Saharan or black features and take them outside of the European continent, as opposed to think, well, these, let's actually think, well, is this what early Brits look like? Do we have room to say early Brits possess this phenotype? Nope, it's black. Put it in Africa. That's what they have to do to cope with the fact that it's all these black people coming out of Britain. They have to place it in Africa. They had no data, nothing suggesting that they had to put it in Africa other than the fact that she was black. That's the only thing that they had. The fact that she was black. They had to take her and they had to put her in Africa. Let's carry on. So I'm just going to hide that comment that's on the screen. There are certain features of the skull you can tell are Caucasian or African. We didn't know her carbon date at that stage or anything about her. So again, it just deepened the mystery. They reconstructed her, and as they did so, her African origins came out in the features of her face. Let's move on to another character from the British Isles now that we've covered Beachy Head Lady in some detail. Okay, Ivory Bangle Lady, which I'm sure you guys have come across before. This is another one who they cope heavily with. The research by University of Reading's Department of Archaeology analysed her facial features, the chemical signature of the food and drinks she consumed, and the evidence from the burial site. The research pointed to a high-status incomer to Roman York, likely to have been of North African descent. Now, once again, I'm going to stress North African is a cope. She had fully African features, i.e. the same thing that they would classify as sub-Saharan features. The only reason they say North African in her case is because she came from the Roman Empire. And they're creating a code. Well, you know, she's black from the Roman Empire. She must be North African. There's no evidence that she was of North African ancestry other than the fact that she was craniofacially and skeletally black. Ivory Bangle lady who was running things is a black woman. That's all they know. It's a black woman. The North African thing, that doesn't even need to be appended. They could have just said she was a black Roman. She could be from Rome. In fact, I think it's very likely she's from Rome. It's very likely that she's ancestrally Roman. But in their mind, ancestrally Roman and black are at opposites to each other. They don't understand that there were black people. Well, at least now they're coming to understand there were plenty of black people in Europe, but they always would try to write them out of history and discount them. Always. That's what they'll always do. So let's move on. The Neanderthal dilemma. One second. Africa teacher, you said they said North African based on the isotope data. No, it says British according to the isotope data. So I think you need to double check that. North African had nothing to do with the isotope data. It said British according to the isotope data. So just double check that. It said that she was local. Okay. So North Africa is a cope. If you want to prove that it said in the isotope data, feel free to post the link and I'll check it out. Let's carry on. Neanderthal dilemma. Let's just put this on really quickly. And we'll watch this video together. I can't remember where I'm logged in. It's here. Let me just pull this out of here. Put this in. Go zoom out. Okay. Let's unmute. Okay, pay attention to this one because this one's going to knock a few people off your chair. Okay, hope you're paying attention.
Make a strong arguments. You might argue that non-Africans today are Neanderthals who just have waves and waves of modern humans from Africa mixing with them. Like who are the ancestors? So that might sound like a silly kind of philosophical statement, but like genealogically, I don't know if this happened before or after my books. You probably don't know about this, but there was a super interesting series of papers that came out which made it clear, many things became clear, but one of them was that actually the proportion of non-Africans ancestors who are Neanderthals is not 2%, which is the proportion of their DNA in our genomes today. If you're a non-African person, it's more like 10 or 20% of your ancestors are Neanderthals. And what actually happened was when Neanderthals and modern humans met and mixed, the Neanderthal DNA was not as biologically fit. And the reason was that Neanderthals had lived in small populations for about 500,000 years since separating from modern humans, which had lived in larger populations, and had accumulated a large number, thousands of slightly bad mutations, such that in the mixed populations, there was selection to remove the Neanderthal ancestry. And that would have happened very, very rapidly. It's not even obvious that non-Africans today are modern humans. They're just... maybe they're Neanderthals who became modernized by waves and waves of admixture.
So I want you to listen to that again, because this one is actually really, there's something really significant being communicated here. Okay, guys? So I'm going to just play this one again in case anyone wasn't paying attention, because it's actually really important that we take in what is being said here. Okay.
If you want to make a strong arguments, you might argue that non-Africans today are Neanderthals who just have waves and waves of modern humans from Africa mixing with them. Like who are the ancestors? So that might sound like a silly kind of philosophical statement, but like genealogically, I don't know if this happened before or after my books. You probably don't know about this, but there was a super interesting series of papers that came out which made it clear, many things became clear, but one of them was that actually the proportion of non-Africans ancestors who are Neanderthals is not 2%, which is the proportion of their DNA in our genomes today. If you're a non-African person, it's more like 10 or 20% of your ancestors are Neanderthals. And what actually happened was when Neanderthals and modern humans met and mixed, the Neanderthal DNA was not as biologically fit. And the reason was that Neanderthals had lived in small populations for about 500,000 years since separating from modern humans, which had lived in larger populations, and had accumulated a large number, thousands of slightly bad mutations, such that in the mixed populations, there was selection to remove the Neanderthal ancestry. And that would have happened very, very rapidly. It's not even obvious that non-Africans today are modern humans. They're just, maybe they're Neanderthals who became modernized by waves and waves of admixture.
So I'm going to pause it there, because there are many points that he touches on that I think are definitely worth visiting, because they contradict many of the narratives that we're being given. Okay. So the first thing is that he's quite clear in that the Neanderthal ancestry of 1 to 2% is a gross underestimation. And he says, really, it's more like 10 times that amount, i.e. not 1 to 2%, but 10 to 20%. And obviously you guys heard it, so I don't have to repeat it. But the reason he says that that doesn't show up is because a lot of that was essentially bad genetics that had to be bred out. So when Neanderthals interbred with human beings, a lot of their genetic material was dropped because it was disadvantageous. So the higher and higher proportions of Homo sapiens sapien was kind of taken into the genome of the offspring, because obviously the Neanderthal DNA essentially was defective because of the closed circles of breeding that essentially they had. So a lot of people, and to be very, very clear, genetic diversity, from what I understand, will always take precedence over so whoever has the broadest genetics, those genes will normally be stronger. Those genes will normally be the ones that proliferate. So this happens throughout history, not just in this case. But the reason why that's really important is that he's saying basically what you have is you've got two schools of thought. You've got the one school of thought, which is the one that everyone has, which is Neanderthals went extinct, okay, in maybe a series of events or wars or whatever, but Neanderthals eventually went extinct and left a trace amount of ancestry in some humans. The other one is that Neanderthals were there, populous, and it was waves and waves of human migration into Neanderthals, dwellings that turned them into what they are now. So essentially, every time they interbred with Homo sapiens sapiens, they would drop more and more of their Neanderthal ancestry and become more and more like Homo sapiens sapien. But at what point do you draw the line when they stopped being Neanderthal, I think, is the point that he's making here. So this is quite significant, because what it highlights is one of the, perhaps the most, he's a geneticist, by the way. I wanted to put the link in, but I literally threw this in last minute in a hurry. So I'm sure you can find, thank you, whoever put that in. I'm sure you can find the information. Someone in the chat will put it in. But the point being, what's the point I was making just then? The reason I added this is because one of the defining factors that differentiates Black Africans from non-Black Africans is just this very factor, i.e. the contribution of Neanderthal ancestry. And I'm not saying that I'm not going to say highly unlikely, but it's very difficult in how integrated our world is, and in how much basically, I'm Nigerian, okay, and there's just no borders in terms to, how Africans kind of take on partners, and that's been the case historically for a really, really long time. So there is a probability that I have trace amounts of Neanderthal ancestry. I'm not sitting here acting like I'm pure Homo sapiens sapien, although it's possible. I know for one, my kids aren't. I can tell you that for free, because their grandmother, on their maternal grandmother, definitely has got some admixture. We know that confirmed 100%. So I'm not sitting here making a purity argument at all. Okay, not at all. That's not the point I'm making. But the point I'm making is that it's still a clear differentiation factor in terms of normally the amount of Neanderthal ancestry can be a very good indication of this modern thing we call race. It can be a very good indication. You can almost assume that if someone is 100% Homo sapiens sapien, that they will be a Black African. You can almost assume that. Okay, so that's just worth pointing out. Big thank you to Stephen Carter. Says race is a system of ideas, all of which must seem consistent with each other. Ideas inconsistent with the system are rejected, while those which seem consistent are accepted. Cope is a hell of a drug. Thank you, King. I agree with you. I agree with you in that the only things that will be accepted or considered when it comes to discussion of race are the things that perpetuate white supremacy, because we must understand that the invention of race goes hand in hand with the invention of white supremacy. Those things go hand in hand. Okay, race only mattered when it placed one at an advantage over the other. Okay, so really we're talking about, yes, exactly as you say, it's a social contract. In reality it doesn't exist. But if you was going to draw a dividing line between the true black man is Homo sapiens sapien 100%. And therefore, if you wanted to, you could say the more Neanderthal ancestry, the less black someone is. You could possibly make that argument. But yes, let's carry on from there anyway. Thank you very much for that contribution. I really appreciate your $20, by the way. So let's carry on from there. In fact, did I read out everything that I wanted to there? Yeah, no, I didn't. So we looked at the video. So I said modern Eurasians, according to the video, I should have said here. I can't even spell properly. Modern Eurasians are Neanderthals, according to this video. That's not a statement that I'm making. Now, we show that the earliest populations of the Near East derived around half their ancestry from basal Eurasian lineage that had little, if any, Neanderthal admixture, and that separated from other non-African lineages prior to their separation from each other. So what am I talking about here? Basal Eurasian ancestry was pervasive in the ancient Near East and associated with reduced Neanderthal ancestry. These are all quotes, okay? And my statement here is basal Eurasian is a misnomer, okay? Remember, I talked about the fact that they will be flexible with terminology. You know, someone will become an African, a sub-Saharan, a Eurasian, this, that, and the other, and they'll flip-flop between geography, race, and this is one of their attempts to do it with the basal Eurasian. But if you look at the evidence we have of the basal Eurasian, we can't draw a dividing line between the basal Eurasian and Black African, okay? Because the basal Eurasian is essentially 100% Homo sapiens sapien. And the basal Eurasian is phenotypically the same as Black Africans. So when did the Black African stop being a Black African and become a basal Eurasian? Particularly if he hasn't interbred with anybody else other than other Black Africans. If there's been no interbreeding with anyone else and they've remained the same group that left Africa without any outside interference, what turned them from being Black Africans into basal Eurasians? And you'll find the answer is absolutely nothing, just modern history. That's all it is. Modern anthropology with the need to make people, to not call people Black and to not call people African. That is the need that's turned them from Black Africans, which is what they remained, into basal Eurasians. Okay, which is a total misnomer. Let's just have a quick look at this study. Okay, so we can just. So she done up insights into the origin of farming in the ancient Near East. Okay, so I'm just going to read this top part over here. We report genome-wide ancient DNA from 44 ancient Near Easterners ranging in time between 12,000 and 1400 BCE from Natufian hunter-gatherers. Now, bear in mind, we already know what Natufians look like. Okay, I think we all agree that Natufians are phenotypically the same as Niger Congo. Okay, phenotypically black. They cluster with either Niger Congo or Nubians on pretty much every vertical. They are physically black African. That is fact. From the Natufian hunter-gatherers to Bronze Age farmers, we show that the earliest populations of the Near East derived around half their ancestry from basal Eurasian lineage. Bear that in mind. That had little, if any, Neanderthal admixture. So half of their lineage comes from these people who don't have any Neanderthal admixture and therefore are consistent with modern black Africans. And that separated from other non-African lineages prior to their separation from each other. Now, isn't that a really interesting way to say? So this is the perception here. Like, I want you to just read this the way that I'm reading it. Yeah. So these people separated from other non-African lineages prior to their separation from each other. Or perhaps these people remained African, yeah, prior to their separation from each other. Why did they have to separate from other non-African lineages? That sounds very, very convoluted. How did that happen? How did they remain pure Homo sapien sapien with no Neanderthal admixture, yeah, and the other non-African lineages didn't? That suggests that they were together, yeah, and then separated, yeah. That doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense that they were African, they remained African, yeah, prior to their integration. This is a very convoluted way of thinking about things, but this is typical. This is very typical because they have to now prove some kind of endogamy that existed within this lineage. It's going around the houses. Okay, the first farmers of the southern Levant, Israel and Jordan and Zagros Mountains were strongly genetically differentiated and each descended from local hunter-gatherers. By the time of the Bronze Age, these two populations, Anatolian-related farmers, had mixed with each other and with the hunter-gatherers of Europe to drastically reduce genetic differentiation. The impact of Near Eastern farmers extended beyond Near East. Farmers related to those of Anatolia spread westward into Europe. Farmers related to those of the Levant spread southward into East Africa. Farmers related to those of Iran spread northward into the Eurasian steppes. And people related to both the early farmers of Iran and to the pastoralists of the Eurasian steppes spread eastward into South Asia. Now, I'm not going to go too much into this study, but I just want us to bear in mind that we have distinct populations, okay, who have zero Neanderthal admixture, okay? Zero Neanderthal admixture. And to me, that means one thing. We also know that these populations happen to have physical traits that are perfectly in line with modern Black Africans. Okay, so a lot of these terminologies and these nomenclatures that are used to describe these populations as Eurasian this and Eurasian that are total misnomers. Okay, it's unnecessary, particularly if people haven't interbred with populations that aren't anything but Africans. But anyway, let's move on from that. And this one here, so I've put more deception here: human evolution, Neanderthal footprints, and African genome. So what is the response to the revelation? Let me just hide that comment. What is the response to the revelation that it's only essentially Black Africans that don't carry any Neanderthal ancestry? What was the response? The response is Africans carry a surprising amount of Neanderthal ancestry. So this is like what they started to put out in 2020. People on every continent. Now, bear that in mind, yeah? This is done deliberately. Every continent, including Africa, have genetic legacy from our extinct cousins, okay? Human evolution, Neanderthal footprints in African genomes. Now, straight away, they're saying, well, Africans do. Well, the argument was never that all Africans don't carry Neanderthal ancestry. The argument was, in particular, distinctively Black Africans don't carry or carry very little Neanderthal ancestry. It wasn't all Africans, because Africans will be the first to tell you people in North Africa are admixed, and or some of them are just whole scale Europeans or Eurasians. Okay, we know that already. But what have they done here? Let's read a quote. Among African populations, including the study of Harris, Platt, and colleagues, the total length of Neanderthal, bear in mind to this, please pay attention to the sentence. The total length of Neanderthal related ancestry varies dramatically, with the largest amount in populations with high proportions of non-sub-Saharan ancestry. What did you need to do a study? Did you really need to do a study? So they're basically saying, well, actually, we've done this study and the amount of Neanderthal ancestry varies a lot. We found that people who weren't sub-Saharan carried more Neanderthal ancestry. I'm sorry, is that supposed to be news to anyone? That's what we knew initially. They're respinning the same data, yeah? But now they're saying, but we found people in Africa. They happen to be in North Africa, i.e. non-sub-Saharan African. They happen to be in North Africa, but they carry sub-Saharan. It's like, come on. And don't get me wrong, they are going to find people in sub-Saharan Africa, quote unquote, with trace amounts of Neanderthal ancestry, but that was always the case. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed whatsoever. They've just wanted to make sure that they place Neanderthal ancestry in Africa. We could have told you that for free, but obviously they have a different version of history. We have the version of history that a lot of North African population are a result of several introgressions, starting from the Circassian slave trade, moving on to, you know, the several invasions, Arab, Persia, whatever, loads and loads of invasions that have taken place in North Africa that we could list ad nauseum, okay, right up to modern day colonialism. That will explain the, you know, Neanderthal / Eurasian ancestry that is on the African continent. That will explain it. But no, not in their world. They have to backdate it. Oh yeah, Neanderthals, the Africans started mixing with Neanderthals 60,000 years ago. Okay, fine, whatever tickles your fancy. You know, it gets to a point where you don't even want to waste your time arguing with these people, seriously. But either which way, it wasn't news. Okay, there was nothing new being reported here. Okay, they just spun the news differently to say Neanderthal ancestry exists in Africa. This is what they do. Deception in anthropology and genetic studies. Now, I didn't manage to finish this slide, but I've said here, because I had to point out, the Max Planck Institute is at the forefront of disinformation and racism in the interpretation of human history. I noted no less than 3 studies done by Krauss and the Max Planck Institute that are purely race-based and always focus on negative press against sub-Saharans. Sub-Saharans is what they call them, okay? Always with a focus on, without any explanation, bringing the word sub-Saharan into it, okay? So I want you to just all be very careful when you're researching studies and you see studies by the Max Planck Institute and by Johann Krauss, because they more often than not are incredibly agendered and incredibly racist. Now, obviously, I told you at the start of the stream, this stream is agendered. I've been quite open with that, but I think it's agendered because it has to be, because there has to be some kind of, you know, counterbalance to the misinformation that is just so constantly being put out by these false interpretations of genetic data. Finally, the Iberomaurusians, I just wanted to touch on this. I've got a quote here. It says they shared about 2/3 of their genetic ancestry with Natufians, who we've already established and discussed are essentially physically Central West Africans and genetically don't carry any Neanderthal ancestry. So therefore, it's going to be hard to draw a distinction between them and in terms of, biologically for modern West Africans or Central West Africans who lived in the Middle East 14,500 and 11,000 years ago, and 1/3 sub-Saharan Africans. So basically, Iberomaurusians are a mix between black people and black people. So all of this idea that they're putting out there, the Iberomaurusians, because of obviously recency bias and presentism, that, Iberomaurusians must be this kind of like Brazilian looking, medium dark it's nonsense. Okay, they're a mix between Natufians and sub-Saharans. Okay, and Natufians are black. I mean, they are physically black according to C. Low Embrace's study, and they are genetically 100% Homo sapiens sapiens. So they are as pure black as you're going to get, as are sub-Saharans. Okay, and this is what it's these two groups that make up the Iberomaurusians, who are closely related to today's West Africans and the Hadza of Tanzania. So 1/3 West African, the other 2/3 Natufians, who are distant Africans, but still Africans. All right. So as far as I'm concerned, that paints quite a clear picture as to how we are at this stage, essentially, where we're looking at the populations of Europe and we keep digging up these bones of black people. In my opinion, the reconstruction of Cheddar Man is a cope. We need to start being okay with the fact that Europe was inhabited by black people, physically black people. The genetic information or the genetic picture is deliberately obfuscated. You're finding that it's being used to create geographic differences are being used to create arguments about race, and arguments that essentially really heavily narrow down the genetic impact of black Africans when everyone descends from black Africans is exactly what we're faced with in terms of how genetics are being interpreted. So that's my view. I didn't want this to be a big genetic thing, so I haven't gone to genetics too much because I don't like the subject. I think the subject's very fuzzy and I don't like it that much. But I did want to paint the picture in terms of what data is out there at the moment in regards to Europe's, the archaic Europe, I should really say, and where we are now. And I actually think it's really positive that there's a lot of acknowledgement of the black presence of Europe. I mean, this admission that the builders of the Stonehenge were black is a massive one. It's a massive admission. And it's not something that I probably would have expected to see in my lifetime, but we're seeing it. So at least I feel like there is some acceptance going on there. But we need to safeguard, we need to keep an eye on the, on the narratives, as you could see, such as with the treatment of Beachy Head Lady, for instance. We have to be very careful with the way the narrative is being controlled, because people who are black or who were black are being race swapped based on genetic data that isn't even being analyzed correctly. And this happens too much. Okay, so that's it. That's the end of this live stream. I think we did quite good for time. I appreciate everybody on the live stream for coming on. I know it was a little bit here, there, up and down, but I hope that everyone got a little bit to take away from it. I'm sure that I made errors. Okay, I'll put my hand up. I'm sure I made errors, but that's because in terms of the field of genetics, I feel like everyone's making errors, if I'm going to be totally honest with you. Yeah, so I feel like everyone's making errors in the field of genetics. I feel it's a field that just needs continual monitoring in terms of how the data is being used to, fuzzy and obfuscate conclusions that people are drawing to. Physical data, physical information that we're given, if they pull out a skeleton and they say this is a black person, there shouldn't be any genetic data that should be able to contradict that. You can't pull out genetic data and override the fact that this is what they do in ancient Egypt. You're pulling out these black skeletons and then you're trying to make genetic arguments and say they're not black. It's like, well, they are black. They're physically a black person. But just like you saw with that Brazilian person that I showed you, you can be physically a black person and have quote unquote white genetics. Does that change the fact that that man's a black man, that he identifies as a black man, that he's proud of his Afro ancestry? He's proud of his Afro ancestry. No one could take that away. You can't. But imagine them finding him or finding his remains, 2,000 years from now, and then declaring that he's a white man because he's got two-thirds European ancestry. That's what they would do. That's what's happening in real time right now. That's a very good illustration of the kind of deception that's taking place right in front of us. Macy, thank you very much for your donation. Appreciate you. Black people populated the entire planet and they will be found everywhere. Absolutely. And I think this is something that is much easier to not argue against than to argue against. It'll be much easier for Europeans to kind of just acknowledge that and start to embrace that fact, because what they're going to find is that they're fighting an uphill struggle. It's only going to be a matter of time that everything that they're putting out is going to be refuted. Because at the moment, when they've got monopoly over information, they will win the battle for a little while when they come and they make these false conclusions. But it's not going to take more than a decade, for instance, for people to get access to all of these Natufian remains, and then qualified, anthropologists, to be like, these are all black people. What are you doing? Why are we telling a false version of history? All of this is going to come. It's like, it's a very delicate house of cards that they're trying to build, but it's eventually going to blow over. So it's just like, it's ridiculous that they're trying to keep this up. It's not going to keep up. They're going to have to acknowledge that the history of mankind is very, very black. And that's just by nature of the fact that everyone descends from Africans. That's what their own science says. They're kicking against the goad here. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know why they do it. But there you go. Thank you, guys. Yeah, I think we're good. I've had a good time. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. And I hope you could take something away. And I think I'm going to wrap it up after saying a big thank you to all of my donators. And the one donation has just come through now as well. Nerd Large said, remember when they casted James Earl Jones, a black man with blue eyes in the Conan movie as a sorcerer from a lost race, hidden in plain sight? What movie was that? Conan. I haven't watched the Conan movies for ages. You've actually given me something to do now. Keep up the revelatory work. I will. I'm glad it was revelatory too, because I guess to me, all of these things are constantly going through my head, and I think that everyone else is thinking them. But I guess to some of you guys, this would be like, oh, you haven't heard this perspective before. So it's very interesting. And it is a perspective, and I've told you I've been agenda. So if you want to obviously double check, triple check anything that I've said, I'm very open to that, and I'm very open to being corrected where I've made errors. But I always try and look at these things through a very logical lens. A lot of this stuff doesn't need jumping through hoops to understand, so let's try and do that as much as we can. Thank you, guys. Hope you've had a fantastic evening. I have really enjoyed this, even though I was kind of dreading it a little bit. We managed to get through it, so I hope you all have a fantastic evening. And yeah, I'm going to say peace out, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye. Hit up the likes before you go, by the way.